Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing an August wrap-up. I haven't done a monthly wrap-up in a really long time because, as most of you know, if you've been watching my videos, that is, I've been doing weekly wrap-ups generally throughout the course of this, pandemic because I've been reading a lot and I have the time for it. But in August, I needed to give myself a little bit of a break. I wasn't getting, super excited about some of the books that I was reading, and then I broke out of my reading slump a little bit when I read The Vanishing Half, which I did a review of. And then I also did a review of Members Only, which was another book that I really, really enjoyed. And throughout the month of August, I basically debated about whether or not I wanted to do an August wrap-up, because the other books that I read, the majority of them were just fine and or disappointing. There were a couple of highlights, which again we'll get into, but basically I was like, maybe I'll just jump into September, forget about all the books I didn't talk about. But I feel like for completionist's sake, I will talk about them hopefully very briefly. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but you can see the timestamp. Grab a snack if you need one. So first up, I have The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert. This is a book that was sent to me by Disney Hyperion. If you follow me on Instagram, you may have seen I did a video thing unboxing this book along with the swag and stuff they sent over. I ended up listening to this book on audiobook because it's available on Hoopla at my local library, and so I gave it a listen because I wanted something lighthearted and fun to listen to, and this is a contemporary young adult book, and so it basically fit the bill. In this story, you are following two characters. One is this girl named Marva, and the other is this boy named Duke. They are both black, although one of the characters is mixed race. They have just turned 18 years old, and you are following them on election day. So this entire book takes place over the course of 24 hours or less than 24 hours. The story starts off following them as they both head off to the voting booth. Duke ends up having some issues at the voting booth, and Marva is a super hardcore, all about the election type of girl, and so she's I will not let you not be able to vote today. And so she basically spends her entire day trying to make sure that this guy can vote. If it wasn't super clear, I'm a total nerd, so this was me in high school. My birthday is in November, and if you aren't aware, here in the United States, our general elections, our presidential elections and things like that, take place in November. And I was the person who was super upset in 2008 because I was 4 days short of being able to vote in that election. And you can still hear the anger in my voice. And anyway, since I couldn't vote, I spent part of my fall of my senior year of high school phone banking for this organization that basically just makes sure that people are registered to vote. Part of this reading experience was fun because I was I could see myself a lot in this book. However, this is a book that's not really for me at the same time, because a lot of the topics that are talked about in here are things that I basically just already know. So I'm just not the target audience for this book. However, this book is really fantastic for teenagers and high schoolers who are going to be of age or are coming of age to be able to vote in this country. And it talks about a lot of topics like voter suppression and making sure you register beforehand, and your rights as a voter and what is acceptable and not acceptable to happen at a polling place and things like that. Obviously, those rules vary from state to state, but there's some general things that are pretty universal. But also, within all of that, Brandy Colbert also integrates all these other ideas about these kids being black, one of them being biracial, and sort of your identity with all of that. And then there's just very normal teen things that are also woven into the story. So there's a lot going on in here, and this is not a very long book. So this feels kind of a superficial view of a lot of these topics. So if you are someone who wants a little bit more depth to their young adult literature, this may not be the best book, but I found these two characters to be really believable. It switches back and forth in perspective between the two of them, and it really provides you with some good point of view, and the backstory to these characters made me wish this book was longer or you followed them over a longer period of time, because I really enjoyed both of them. There is a romantic storyline that also happens in here that is not rushed at all. It doesn't really feel like insta-love, even though it only takes place over the course of 24 hours. Everything that they deal with over the course of this day feels like it builds up to kind of the romantic element of this story. So all of that felt really realistic. So yeah, I think I gave this book a 3 or 3.5 stars, mostly because, again, I know that this book is not for me, but I'm really glad that this book exists in the world. And if you are someone who like is a teen librarian or like has teenagers in their life, I feel like this would be a really fantastic book to hand to them, to be like, hey, this is kind of how voting works in this country, and this is why you should care about voting in elections and stuff like that. So yeah, really glad this book exists in the world, and it definitely made me want to read more Brandy Colbert in the future. All right, next up, I read Yellow Crane by Sierra Crane Murdoch. This is a nonfiction book, and it's pitched as a true crime book, but really it's like a mashup of two different books together. Depending on how you feel, you may or may not enjoy that fact. So the story mainly follows this actual person named Lisa Yellowbird, who lives in North Dakota. She was like in prison for a while and was released in like 2009, 2010. And she basically has like an addiction problem. She did drugs before, she was addicted to alcohol, all this stuff. She's in recovery now, but she basically becomes obsessed with this crime that has taken place where there is this man who's gone missing. It was a white man who worked on the oil fields in North Dakota, pretty close to the reservation that Lisa Yellowbird's family's from. And so she decides that she is going to start looking into this case. And so this mashup of these two stories is basically following Lisa Yellowbird, and it's kind of like a mini biography on who she is. And then the other part is this true crime aspect that follows what is happening in the oil fields in North Dakota and what happened to this person. So yeah, this is another book that I gave like a 3-star rating. It feels like I said, two books smashed into one. And so there are times where you're reading the stuff about Lisa Yellowbird and it's like you're not really sure why you're reading it, other than the fact that you can tell that Sierra Crane Murdoch is very intrigued by Lisa Yellowbird as a person. And there's even like a whole like author's note at the end of this book that discusses the fact that like Sierra Crane Murdoch basically became friends with her and spent a significant amount of time with her, and so it would have felt disingenuous to like not have her as a part of the story or to not explain her story as a part of all of this. But if you're going into this just wanting a true crime book, you're probably going to be disappointed because like half of the book is not about the true crime aspect at all. Although it is very nicely kind of broken up, so you can basically just read like every other chapter if you just want the true crime aspects of it. But the true crime aspects of it are like very intriguing in my opinion. I'm someone though who's like very into kind of like what is happening with oil companies in the United States. I read Amity and Prosperity earlier this year, and kind of like the ideas behind like what oil companies are allowed to do and what they get away with, and also like the discussions about like jurisdiction and what is considered local jurisdiction, what is considered tribal jurisdiction, and what is considered federal jurisdiction, and how like someone disappearing like in a reservation or near a reservation creates this murky world where basically no one deals with the case because the lines are super unclear, and also no one kind of wants to deal with it. So I found like those aspects of the book really interesting, but like again, it feels like completely disjointed. It feels like it should have been like two completely separate stories. So yeah, it's like a 3-star book for me. I also kind of knew that going into it, so I felt like I was prepared for that aspect of it, but I do know a lot of people who are like super disappointed in this book because it's basically just pitched as a true crime story, and it's definitely not just a true crime story. So if you plan on picking this book up, just know that going into it. I definitely enjoyed it, and I was definitely intrigued by the story, but there are definitely like parts of it that feel very drawn out, much more than they needed to be. And I think again, it's just because Sierra Crane Murdoch was like super intrigued by Lisa Yellowbird as a person, and so like her entire history is basically written out in this book, and I don't know if it necessarily needed to be, but that's just my opinion. Next up, I have Little Brother by Cory Doctrow. This is another book that I listened to on audiobook, and the reason why I read it was because I recently was a guest on the Get Book podcast, which is a podcast that Book Riot hosts or whatever. Someone wrote in basically asking for mysteries and thrillers that had basically like a internet-y twist to it. They basically just said they wanted something that reminded them of Mr. Robot. And so I was looking into different types of books that I could potentially recommend. And then this one caught my eye a little bit. So this is a young adult book that came out in like 2008 or something like that. And I have such mixed feelings about it because the actual topics that are discussed in here are like so on point to the world that we live in right now. It's kind of creepy. But at the same time, one, this is a young adult book, so there are certain things in here that are like way over explained. And two, it's a young adult book written by a white guy. And so there's so much stuff in here that I just read it or was listening to it and was just like, oh my gosh, that's such a terrible thing to say. So in the story, you are following this character named Marcus, who basically is like a hacker at the age of 17. He lives in San Francisco, and in the world that he's occupying, there's like very heavy surveillance. Like the cameras basically follow you everywhere you go. The school that he attends gives him a laptop that has a bunch of like tracking software on it, so it knows exactly like what you are doing on there, all this stuff. And the way the story begins is that Marcus has basically convinced his friend to ditch school with him because they are part of this like role-playing game, I think it is. I don't know if it's LARPing exactly, but it's something along those lines. And so they ditch school because the clue's just been released, and so they go to try to like meet up with their friends to figure out what exactly is going on to be part of this game. When they are meeting up with their friends, there is a terrorist attack in San Francisco. The friend that Marcus is convinced to ditch school with him gets really badly injured during this attack. He basically like runs in front of what he thinks are the police to try to stop them so that way his friend can get help. But then they end up getting arrested. And they basically get interrogated by the Department of Homeland Security for a couple of days, I believe it is, before eventually getting released. But their friend who was badly injured never actually got released. And so Marcus basically makes it his mission to take down the DHS. So that premise sounds like super insane, and it kind of is a little bit insane because thinking of like a 17-year-old trying to take down the DHS is like, what? But at the same time, as a person who is living in 2020, there's a lot of things talked about in here that's like super relevant, and also like there are things like the ACLU calling for the end of the DHS. So not that far off, Cory Doctrow. So those aspects of the story I found to be like super, super fascinating. The problems I have with this story, one, it really, really over-explains, in my opinion, internet-y things. And again, this book was written in like 2008-ish time, so may have been more warranted. And again, this is like a young adult book, so maybe the people picking up this book don't know that much about it. But it really like over-explains the way like you hack a computer or you like remove surveillances, or it like over-explains nerdy things like LARPing. And maybe it was because I was listening to it on audio that it like really felt like a heavy burden on the book. Like it was really slowing things down. Maybe if I had been reading a physical copy of it or an ebook copy of it, it would have been better, because then I could just kind of like skim over those sections, because I basically know all those things. And again, I'm a giant nerd, so maybe that's why. And maybe like other people need those explanations, but for me, it like really, really slowed down the plot. There's also this sort of like what I'm calling a Will Wheaton-esque aspect to the narrator. I don't know if the narrator did this on purpose or if Cory Doctrow did this on purpose, but like the way that it explains things feels very like condescending at the same time. And like if you think of Will Wheaton's character on like Star Trek, Wesley, or like his character on The Big Bang Theory or something like that, where he just has like this superior attitude to you, it's really obnoxious, and it made me want to punch this guy in the face. But I also really wanted to know if he was going to take it down the DHS. The other aspect of it is that like, again, this is a 17-year-old boy, and he says things that are like super inappropriate, specifically the way that women are described in this book. He literally calls someone a horse face, like another girl describes her as having a horse face. What? Literally wanted to kick this guy in the balls. So I left this book as like completely unrated on Goodreads, because I like can't in my right mind recommend a book that describes women in that way to other people. But at the same time, I also was super intrigued by like everything that Cory Doctrow was doing in this book, especially at the time that it was written. So yeah. All right, next up, I read Destination Wedding by Diksha Basu. This is a book that I was like super excited to see was coming out. I read her first book, The Windfall, whenever it came out, and I really enjoyed that book a lot. It's basically a comedy of errors taking place in India, and so I was very intrigued to see sort of like what she would do next. I found this book to be a little bit disappointing. There are elements of it that are really fun and really redeeming, and I think if you're looking for just like a light, fun summer read, this could fulfill that for you. In this story, you are following this character named Tina Das who lives in New York City, and she basically just doesn't know where she belongs. She has spent some time in India, and for her work she basically travels back and forth to Delhi and Bombay and things like that, and she's not really sure like where her identity lies. And so this story follows her as she travels to India for a wedding. She has a white friend who is accompanying her best friend, and she's also traveling there with her parents who are divorced, and her mother is dating a white man now, and her father's not dating anyone. Or, well, at the beginning of the story you find out that he's part of a dating site, but that's a whole nother storyline that I won't get into because that's fun in and of itself. And so you just follow them as they travel to India. They are a part of this like really extravagant weddings week, basically. And yeah, it's just like a lighthearted, fun book. So what I really liked about this book was honestly like the parents. The parents in this book, in my opinion, are very non-traditional. And so reading this book was just sort of intriguing, and honestly I kind of wish the entire book was just told from their perspective because they were the best part of it, and I don't think their background and their storyline was explored enough in my opinion. Tina is like super annoying, and I was over her and her friend very quickly. It feels like their storylines are very cyclical. So Tina's basically dealing with the situation of, does she belong in America? Does she belong in India? Which is a very like real thing that I think kids of immigrants deal with, like figuring out their identity and where they belong because they don't really feel like a part of either world. She is also part of a streaming service sort of situation, and her job is to basically like pitch shows that this streaming service can do, and she's basically been in a rut and can't think of anything to pitch. And so like part of this is like her trying to figure out what exactly she wants to pitch. And then her friend that's with her is in like a steady, pretty long-term relationship, but she goes on this trip and she's now like questioning her entire relationship, and that was like the most annoying storyline. So yeah, I feel like this is a book where it's like, if you enjoy sort of like the lavishness and over-the-topness of a book like Crazy Rich Asians, then you might enjoy this book as well. It's also very fun, very lighthearted, and again, the parents were the best part of this book, so I feel like just for their storylines, this book is worth reading. Tina and her friend's storyline just felt like very repetitive. Like it feels like they're just spinning their wheels the entire week until the ending when everything sort of resolves. So I would have been much happier with much less Tina, much less of her friend, and much more of the parents. So yeah, if you are someone who also read The Windfall and really enjoyed it, I think maybe lower your expectations a little bit for this book, but I definitely think it was still like a fun summer read sort of thing. And then speaking of Crazy Rich Asians, I also read Sex and Vanity by Kwan, and this is a book that I gave 2 stars to. I really didn't like this at all. It feels like Kwan just took all of the parts of the Crazy Rich Asian series that I didn't like and put it into a book. So this book is meant to be like a loose retelling of A Room with a View, and I've never read that book before. I think I watched part of an adaptation during one of my high school English classes, but that's basically the extent of my knowledge. So if you've read A Room with a View, you may really enjoy this book, but as someone who has no real background in that story at all, this book was not for me. So in this story, you are following this character named Lucy Churchill, who at the beginning of the book is headed off to Capri for the wedding of a friend. And she's there with her basically chaperone named Charlotte, I think. And while she's there, there's like this really snobby guy named George Tsao who she like immediately doesn't like, but then obviously over the course of this like wedding weekend she ends up getting attracted to. They end up in a kind of a scandalous situation, and then you jump forward in time and you deal with basically the aftermath of all the stuff that happened in Capri. So this book, again, it just was not the book for me. It is like so heavy in the glitz and glamour of being an upper class person, and that is like my least favorite part of the Crazy Rich Asian series. It felt like so much of this book was just talking about like brands and designers and all these aspects of being rich that like, I don't know if this is a 2020 thing or relatively recent development, but like right now just I'm not into. Like I think this is like a thing that I'm developing as I get older, but like I'm very over the obnoxious opulence of rich people. And I recognize the fact that like I am also like very rich in very many different ways. But like sort of like the just obnoxiousness about like brands and flashiness and your zip code and where you live and all this stuff, like I don't care at all. And like I think Kevin Kwan doesn't develop Lucy or anyone else really as characters, and they feel just very, very flat. So I didn't really care what was happening at all through the entirety of that book. I just kept going because it's like easy to read, but I didn't enjoy my experience at all. So I gave it 2 stars. Again, maybe if I had some sort of like reference point with A Room with a View, I would feel really differently about this book, but I don't. So I don't. Next, I have Blacktop, Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. And this is a book that's been getting a decent amount of buzz in like the mystery world. You are following this character named Beauregard, or Bug, who is now on the straight and narrow. He is a husband. He runs a mechanic shop, but he basically was like a driver before and used to help with like robberies and stuff like that, but now he's on the straight and narrow. However, there's like a new mechanic shop in town and they are like super undercutting all of the prices, and so they're losing business, and he's like super behind on all these bills and stuff like that, and he gets an opportunity to basically be part of a diamond heist, and obviously things don't go quite as smoothly as you hope. So this is a book that's like Ocean's 11 meets Drive or something along those lines, because again, Bug is a driver, so there's like all of these action-packed driving scenes that like 1000% need to be made into a movie. It's very much an action-packed book, so it's all like page-turnery and really fun, but there's not a whole lot of character development, or there's like a little bit of character development, but not as much as I personally would appreciate. And I will 100% admit that like some of the stuff that happens towards the end, I was like, I don't understand what's happening right now, but this is just really fun. And again, I think that's just like me not being used to reading like action scenes and stuff like that. Like it's really hard for me to follow that stuff. So I definitely think there's a lot of things where I was just like, I don't know what's happening, but I'm having a lot of fun going along for the ride. So again, if you want something like super fun, super page-turnery, like a fast-paced thriller, all this stuff, but it has like this noir bent to it as well, which like adds a nice sense of like atmosphere and things like that to it. So again, this is a pretty strong book. I think on Goodreads I rated it maybe 4 stars, but it's probably more like a 3.5, because again, I would have loved more like character development and less action, but that's just 100% I know a personal preference. So I think that this is a really fun book. Next, I have The Majesties by Tiffany Tsao, and this was probably one of my more disappointing books that I read this month. I think I was just like really excited for it because the premise sounded so interesting. So the story follows these 2 sisters who are of Chinese descent, I believe. Their names are Gwendolyn and Estella, and the way the story starts off, you find out that Estella has basically poisoned their entire family, like not just immediate family, but like extended family as well. And everyone has died, including Estella. Gwendolyn is still alive, but she's in a coma. And it's like, while she's in this coma, she's thinking about Estella and she's trying to figure out why she did what she did. So that's how the story begins. And then you basically like flash back in time and you find out all this stuff about Gwendolyn and Estella and their family and things like that, and all of this stuff that occurred that lead up to the mass murder. So yes, premise sounds super intriguing. However, the beginning is very good, but the middle is terrible. I actually found the ending to be pretty interesting. Like I very much like how they wrap everything up, but that middle part is such a drag. I also listened to this one on audiobook, and I think the main reason why I continued going with it is because, again, I was listening to it on audiobook and I was listening to it while I was doing other things. So it was basically just like an inertia thing. Like there is a part in this middle there where you're just like, I don't care about any of these things that you're talking about right now. I think the book basically like lost its focus in the middle, and then eventually it gets to the point and you start to see it leading up to the mass murders, and I got like super into it again. So yeah, I think I gave it 3 stars. It might be more like a 2.5 stars. Again, I really liked the ending and the way that they developed certain things. I didn't see all of those reveals coming. But there's some interesting stuff that happens with like Estella's husband and his like character development, so to speak, that I was not expecting at all. And it was interesting that it was even like brought up in and of itself. And I feel like I need to go into spoiler territory, so I'm just gonna like give you the warning now to jump ahead to the next book, because I won't be talking about much more with this one if you don't want to be spoiled, but keep watching if you don't care, or if you've already read the book. So the main thing that intrigued me was basically like the turn that Estella's husband has, and he basically becomes a born-again Christian, and he starts to feel extreme guilt over his family and his family's wealth. So Estella's family as well as her husband's family are both very, very wealthy. Estella's husband basically realizes the reason why they've become so rich is because they profited by exploiting other people. But he basically has a come to Jesus moment, so to speak, because he's a born again Christian. I suppose that's a weird way to phrase it, but he realizes like the fact that they don't deserve any of their money, and he wants to like basically tell a reporter the truth about everything. And that leads to him dying. So that whole aspect of it I found to be like super intriguing, and I wish like a lot of the middle section was cut out to like just get to that point, which is like a weird thing to say because this book is so short, but it definitely did not feel short in my opinion. So yeah, if it didn't have that sort of ending to it that leads to Estella murdering everyone, I probably would have given this book like 1 or 2 stars. But that character development was so intriguing to me because you rarely see discussions like that. So yeah, I can't really like highly recommend the book, but maybe like read the beginning, skim the middle, read the ending. I don't know if that's a good way to recommend books. All right, next up I have a couple of middle grade mystery books to talk about. We did an episode of Read or Dead where we talked about middle grade mysteries, and so I read a couple of them because, you know, they're fast reads, and I checked them all out from the library because I didn't know which one I would want to talk about for the show. So first up I have Liar and Spy by Rebecca Steed. I read When You Reach Me a number of years ago, but I read it as an adult, and I really, really enjoyed that book. So I've always been meaning to read more Rebecca Steed, and this one was also really good, although, like, I don't know if you necessarily could call it a mystery in the traditional sense. So you are following this character named George who is in 7th grade. He is, like, not really popular at school or any of this stuff. He and his family are moving from their house in one part of New York and moving into an apartment because they've run into some financial troubles and things like that. When they move into this new apartment, him and his dad are going to the dumpster to throw out a bunch of stuff after moving in, and they see a sign for a spy club, and so their dad thinks that this is really like fun and decides to write a note on it saying like, sure, what time? And then the next time George goes and checks the dumpster, he sees a time on it, and he like feels really bad because his dad like wrote that note is kind of a joke and doesn't want to make the kid who made that sign feel bad. So he shows up for the meeting. So at the meeting, he meets this kid named Safer, who is about the same age as him. And he ends up joining the spy club. And part of the spy club is learning how to be a spy. So Safer is trying to teach him all this stuff about being a good spy. But they're also spying on someone in their apartment complex named that Safer calls Mr. X, who wears all black, and Safer says potentially does suspicious things. So yeah, that's just like the general summary that you get at the back of the book, but there is so much more that's going on in the story, and I found it to be so well done, full of so much heart. It's a lot more complex than I was expecting. The mystery aspect of it isn't really a mystery, although there's also like another part of the story that is kind of a mystery. Like there's a lot of reveals that happened at the end that I wasn't quite ready for. There's also a lot of really good discussions in here about like belonging at school and making friends and finding your own people and stuff like that I really enjoyed. So yeah, I really like this a lot. It's not quite as good as When You Reach Me in my opinion, but it's still a really enjoyable middle grade book. Then I read From the Desk of Zoe Washington by Janae Mark. This book follows Zoe Washington, and the story begins, I think, on her 12th birthday, and she receives a letter from her dad who is in prison, who she has never had any communication with at all. And so she decides that she is going to write back to him, and they start secretly writing letters to each other. Her mom never wanted her to like have any communication with him. Zoe finds out that her dad is innocent basically of whatever happened, and so she starts to look into what actually happened on the night of the crime and trying to basically prove his innocence. Again, that's the back of the book tin, but there's a lot more happening in this story. It is a mystery in the sense of like you're following Zoe as she's trying to figure out what exactly happened here, but it's a middle grade book, so they have things happen like really conveniently. It also just talks about general like middle school things like having a friend who like makes other friends and like dealing with that tension. Zoe really wants to be a cook, and she like interns at a local bakery that her mom's friend runs and stuff like that, and sort of dealing with like wanting more responsibility and getting older but people still treating you like a kid, that tension. Yeah, it's not like a mystery in the general sense of like we're finding all these clues, like everything just happens and you're following Zoe as it happens. But it also talks about like interesting things about like the incarceration rate of Black people in the United States and stuff like that, which I was not expecting at all. This one was more like a 3-star, 3.5-star book for me. I could realize again that I'm not the target audience for this book, and this is very good for people who are in middle school and are just like starting to learn about these things or read about these things. But everything just felt like super convenient in here, which again, middle grade books. So yeah, not my favorite out of the bunch, but definitely one I enjoyed. And then the final middle grade book I have to talk about is The Parker Inheritance. And this one was by far my favorite, and it didn't feel at all like a middle grade book. So if you're someone who's like looking for books for actual middle school kids, this one feels more like young adult in my opinion. So you're following this character named Candace, whose grandmother recently passed away, and her parents are getting a divorce. Her and her mom go to their grandmother's house to basically clear it out and to stay there for the summer. They are remodeling their home because they need to sell it because again, it's too big for just the two of them. And while she's at her grandmother's house, she's in the attic and she finds this letter that basically talks about how there was significant inheritance or money that was left in the city that her grandmother lived in. And there are a bunch of like clues basically that you need to solve in order to find where this money is hidden. Part of like the backstory of this is the fact that like her grandmother was trying to follow these clues and trying to figure out where all this money was hidden. She was a city manager at the time, and she ends up like basically digging up a park and gets fired and leaves town and is like basically a disgrace after that. Candace is like trying to solve this mystery now, but also she doesn't want to like tell her mom about it because again, this led to her grandmother being a disgrace in this town and things like that. But there's also like flashback scenes because the person who left this inheritance is someone who originally lived in this town. And I'm not going to go farther into it than that, but it basically flashes back and forth in time. And the flashback scenes were so good. I would 100% have read an entire book of just those flashback scenes. Like, the biggest detriment to this book, in my opinion, is all of the present day stuff. The flashback scenes were fantastic, and I want to read more about those characters and what was happening in the town during that time. So well done. So well done. I've seen a lot of people on Goodreads basically talking about how this book is way too long for middle schoolers, which again, very true. So yeah, this book might be like too long or too advanced for the average middle school kid, but as an adult reading this book, I loved it, and I highly recommend it, even if you're someone who doesn't typically read a middle school book. All right, and then the final book that I have to talk about is The Revisioners by Margaret, Wilkerson, Sexton. This was another book that was kind of disappointing for me personally. I read A Kind of Freedom, which was her debut novel, whenever that came out, and I enjoyed that book. I think I gave it like 3 or 3.5 stars. This book kind of felt like a mess. In the story, it's mainly following 3 timelines, but 2 of the timelines follow this woman named Josephine. It's like late 1800s when Josephine is a young girl and a slave. And then like the 1920s when Josephine is a free woman in the United States, but obviously it's the 1920s and she's still Black. And then the modern day storyline where you are following this character named Ava. She is basically just lost her job, but then she gets hired by her paternal grandmother, who is a white woman, to basically become her caregiver. And like the grandmother says that she'll pay her all her full wages and she can live in the house and all this stuff. And so Ava basically realizes that like if she does this for like a year, she will have saved up enough money to be able to buy her own place. This is a book that shows that Margaret Wilkerson Sexton can write individual stories, but those 3 storylines are so disjointed from each other, in my opinion. Josephine is like a relative of Ava, like Ava is one of Josephine's descendants, but those stories feel so completely separate from each other. Also, I didn't like go into this really knowing anything about this book, and so you start off reading the Ava storyline, and again, this might be a personal thing because I don't like multiple perspective books, but then you spend the majority of the book actually with Josephine because you flash back in time and you see Josephine as both a child and an adult. I didn't think all of that was necessary. I think this book feels very unbalanced and the Ava storyline is very underdeveloped. I could see like the themes that Sexton wanted to explore in here, specifically sort of like the sympathy that these specific Black women feel towards white women and the way that white women have abused that sort of power and privilege. And those things are interesting, but this felt like almost 3 separate books. And again, the Ava storyline is super, super underdeveloped. I probably still will read more of her books in the future just to see if she does something that I really love, because I felt like A Kind of Freedom had so much potential. And again, the writing in its book on like an individual sentence level or like an individual chapter level is really beautiful. And there's some really interesting things explored in here, but I just felt like this didn't need to be 3 different storylines, or the storylines needed to be connected a little bit better. Like maybe if there were more stories from like other people who were kind of in between Josephine and Ava, you would have felt more of a familial connection. But because there's like almost 100 years between one character and another character, the connection doesn't feel that strong. So yeah, 2.5 stars for me, partially just because I was kind of disappointed and I had some high hopes for this one, but I know other people who really loved it, so again, it might just be me and my general hatred towards books with multiple perspectives. Alright, that's everything I read in August. Again, there'll be links up with the cards and stuff to the individual book reviews that I did this month, and those books I loved, and hopefully I'll get back into doing weekly updates so that way I don't have to do these 30-minute videos. So yeah, let me know what books you read in August that you really enjoyed, because again, always looking for some good recommendations, or if you've read any of these books, feel free to leave a comment down below talking to me about them. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.